you? Oh, that's good, man. You got a big old face, man. You might be a Nephilim, man, coming to attack me. I mean, you wrote about giants. How do I know you're not a giant?
Well, we've known each other for a while, Daniel. I hope you would take my word for it.
Well, I never asked you, so I guess never thought about it. But Judd, welcome back to the program. You're obviously a great regular guest, but man, there are so many things going on. You've written about giants, of course, and cryptids and different things. And I'm just going to start off blasting because we got a lot to talk about. You know that China, in conjunction with the U.S., has developed the first human monkey hybrid embryo. These things are rising up. It's freaking Planet of the Apes coming our way, Judd.
Yeah, it seems to be. In fact, I heard about that just the other day when the story broke. But of course, these human-animal hybrid, these chimerical creatures have been, we've probably been making them for decades, and the news is really just now hitting the public. But I suppose it's apropos in this case to say that what are we looking at? A prospective Planet of the Apes. I know every time I read the news, I feel like Charlton Heston in that scene where they're hosing him down with the water hose and he's screaming, "It's a madhouse."
Yeah. In fact, it is a madhouse, but we know that boundary was going to be crossed eventually. I mean, even Elon Musk, his partner, now I don't know what that's supposed to mean, says that Jurassic Park is completely feasible with the technology we have. So, and including the insect thing of it, are movies telling us what kind of freaky future we got coming our way?
I think they have been, pop culture in general, not just movies, but literature and, the pulp stuff of pop culture in a lot of ways has been the propaganda arm for a lot of this. And so in many ways, we have been, sort of conditioned to think about these things as normal is probably not the right word, but maybe normalized by the time, so that people are more able to so that people are more manageable, I suppose, when all of it hits.
Manageable, that's a word. Manageable, that means obey, pretty much what I'm thinking.
Well, I mean that I use the term euphemistically. I agree with you. In the last discussion we had, I talked about how words, in particular one word, the word for king, has been basically engineered by these forces, and that's just really the tip of the iceberg. The use of culture, the weaponization of culture, is very much the modus operandi of whatever appellation people want to attach to this cabal. I heard a news program earlier today, and they refer to them as globalists. They're not. This particular group wasn't really willing to describe them as Illuminati or Luciferians or whatever, but they were looking. They could see the political breadcrumbs, in other words. And just to sort of bring that back full circle, is our pop culture or our movies, are they conditioning us to be prepped and ready for this sort of thing and be more malleable and manageable? I think the answer is yes, because it's not just in pop culture. All of our institutions in our society have in one way or another been co-opted in this manner to achieve the same sorts of ends.
There's that classic question that still remains out there. Would somebody be able to clone Jesus from the Shroud of Turin?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting proposition. I suppose the only reason that you would do that is to make a false Christ, because any other Christ other than the real Christ is as John pointed out, a false Christ, an antichrist. And no matter how refined our technology or borrowed watcher technology, whatever you want to call it, it would still be imperfect. It wouldn't be a perfect copy completely.
Mm-hmm. Well,
but that raises some interesting questions about where we're at in terms of our biotech and our genetic tech.
Well, where we're at is we're going to have some monkeys running around here saying they're wanting a tax refund pretty soon. And of course, they're obviously going to have to be able to vote, and they're not going to be voting for the good side.
And that again, that's another that's another piece of the puzzle here is blurring the line, or at least sort of confusing the definition of what it means to be a person or a human. And we've seen those boundaries pushed with things like transgenderism and transhumanism.
Mm-hmm.
So
right.
Yeah, I mean it's on our doorstep right now, basically.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's on our doorstep, and it's coming to a hospital near you where they're going to start being born. Because so if they're able to create this sort of hybrid, this embryo, is that going to require to be put into a woman, or is it going to be like in the island where they grew humans in bags of juice?
Well, I mean, I suppose either one, conceivably could be a possibility. We certainly have the technology to implant embryos, human embryos in women these days, and ostensibly you would think that would transfer to these chimerical sorts of creatures as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to say what the exact delivery system would be.
Well, it just seems that everything that we've seen in movies is what's coming down the pike. The first Jurassic Park was 30, 40 years ago. And you got to figure that the technology is probably well surpassed that. There used to be it seemed like there used to be ethical boundaries, but I see now, of course, if the United States wants to cross boundaries, they'll fund, say, I don't know, like the Wuhan lab where something number 19 was developed and let loose on the planet with the aid of U.S. dollars, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this sort of thing has been the fodder of all kinds of futurist and science fiction writers, for decades, and some of them have actually been on the inside track in terms of what globalists are wanting to do. But yeah, you make an excellent point about ethics, and this is tied to our educational system too. I've spoken on a number of occasions how in this, in particular in America, but in general in the West, we have steadily gotten rid of the classical paradigms and the classical approach to education, which had been the standard in Western civilization for centuries. And it's
Mm-hmm.
what, it's what put us, on the to borrow. Or to turn a phrase, it's what put us on the edge, the cutting edge of many things.
Right on.
Was that classical system of education and the pursuit of classical virtues, what is good, what is true, and what is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And at the center of all that is objective truth. Well, postmodernism eradicated the last embers of objective truth, and if one truth is as good as another, then transferable to the scientific purview, ethics become relative as well, and it no longer matters. I think you mentioned Jurassic Park, Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park, and I always think of Dr. Ian Malcolm's warning about how these scientists were so enamored, and in this high of whether or not they could do all of this stuff. They never stopped to look at it longitudinally and think whether they should do it or not. Was it the right or ethical thing to introduce these creatures that had for millions of years ostensibly been out of the biosphere? Look at look at the conditions right now. That these vaccines for COVID-19 have been rolled out. They're unprecedented.
Mm-hmm.
And it occurred to me that, the buzz when they first came out is that they just, bypassed human trials. And it occurred to me the other day that they didn't skip human trials. They're conducting them right now with these multiple vaccines that they're rolling out, using this very exotic, gene therapy, epigenetics, messenger RNA components, to try and, quote unquote, fight this virus. It's very, very, very unethical. Unethical on a Tuskegee experiments sort of level.
I've got a question for you. From Jose Salinas. Says, Dr. Burton, have you ever heard of Gilgamesh getting cloned?
No, not cloned, but okay. A, I should say it wouldn't surprise me. B, I remember when this story broke about finding the tomb of Gilgamesh. This was back in 2003. I was working as a genealogist and a historian for a research foundation, and I came in and flipped a computer on and read the news ticker, and I saw this story on the BBC, and you can still find it on the internet. It's a bit of a labyrinth to find it, but it said, the byline was, or rather the headline was, the tomb of Gilgamesh has been found. Archaeologists found the tomb of Gilgamesh,
right.
and within 6 weeks, the invasion of Iraq begins.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, I've heard from people that I trust, that yes, the body was found. It was in a very surprising state of preservation. That the military came in and not only flew the body out, but there were other antiquities that they got as well. So that there were multiple layers to the invasion of Iraq, and the acquisition of this, these arcane artifacts were had to have been part of the mission. But it wouldn't surprise me that material garnered from the physical remains of these things, and again, I've heard descriptions that we're talking about a 12 or 15 foot tall specimen. So it would not surprise me to find reverse engineering of any kind that they could derive from whatever technologies that they could make from the remains of this thing.
Now, it seems to me you see, there's a lot of movies with Nazis in them, and the Nazis are always looking, or are depicted as looking for these ancient artifacts like the Spear of Destiny and and various things in the Ark of the Covenant. So did they believe that they had power, that those items had power? And isn't that what we're kind of doing now? Still looking for these artifacts. You say every time it seems like there's a war, the first thing America does is go raid the museums. But
exactly, of course, we're still looking for them. We've never stopped. A good friend of mine, his grandfather was in the OSS during World War II. Which was the predecessor to the CIA, and I'll never forget the story that my buddy told me about. The first time they watched Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark together. When it was over, he looked down at him and he said, that stuff actually went on. So people have wanted to control that level of power, political or otherwise. They've always sought those things, and the governments of the world are still looking for that. And it's not just these aren't just flights of fancy. They hired the U.S. military actually hired Assyriologist and Sumeriologist and archaeologist to put together a kind of identification system, almost like the death cards that were used in Vietnam, but instead of instead of using them as death tags or warnings, the deck of cards had different kinds of Mesopotamian artifacts that they were specifically looking for, so that the soldiers could identify them and catalog them. So this is, people can read into it whatever they want to. They can say that they just did that for cultural resource. They're just trying to preserve, this, that, and the other. That's probably true to an extent. I'm not trying to vilify the entire operation, but on the other hand, it sort of lends insight into, one of the things we were tasked with doing was guarding the Baghdad Museum to keep it from being looted. Well, our Spec Ops team spent a whole 30 minutes there, and then we left, which tells me that we got what we went in, we got what we went in for, and then left.
Yeah. Sounds like we got what we were looking for. All right, Judd, let's get to another question for you from Smoke C. It says, Doctor, do you think it's possible for regular folks like us to learn to heal ourselves so we can eliminate big corporate pharma?
I think so, to an extent. It's interesting. The AMA, the American Medical Association, which is the sort of overarching regulatory board for medicine in the United States, has some interesting origins. It was founded in the 1840s, ostensibly the founding was to regulate medicine for the safety of the American population, but amongst other things, their goals were to peripheralize and demonize things like osteopathic medicine or homeopathic medicine, which had been the foregoing kind of medicine, that is the use of herbs and natural medicines and body manipulation and sort of a chiropractic kind of approach to medicine. Those had been a very functional component of medicine, particularly if you were in rural areas. You had to you didn't have access to a conventional doctor all the time, and so you might be beholden to people who had specialized knowledge of herbal and natural remedies. And so to a great extent, we can tap into that and sort of undergird the influence of big pharma. But that's a looming problem today, from what I understand, because of course they want to put patents on vitamins and minerals and herbs and things like that, and regulate them under the auspices of the Food and Drug Administration. Well, that sounds crazy. I mean, how do you put a patent on a cherry or an orange or something like that? But I mean, to a great degree, I think we can and we should. Not that I'm saying that we don't need conventional medicine too, but it's very clear that big pharmaceutical corporations do not have our best interests at heart. It's better for people to be sick, because it's basically an ATM machine for them. The more money and power they garner, the more money and power they garner.
Well, it looks like Johnson & Johnson's getting a big black eye from their shot. Some bad things happening over there. Doreen 8951 says, Judd, do you think vaccines will turn people into zombies?
Well, I suppose it depends on what your definition of zombie is. I mean, there are a lot of people
flesh-eating freak
who are mindlessly taking the vaccine,
right?
But if I read into this correctly, they're probably asking about the changes that this exotic, the exotic variants of this vaccine could potentially make. The fact that you have messenger RNA components in, what is it, two of them? Is it the Pfizer and the AstraZeneca? I think is the other one. Yeah. The thing about messenger RNA, and I had to really delve back deep into some of my physical anthropology stuff and genetic stuff. The thing about messenger RNA is that's what basically looks at our DNA structure in our cells. Thinking of that as kind of the blueprint for us, and then builds us. Well, if you introduce exotic messenger RNA into a confined, biosphere, like a human cell or human body,
right?
My question is, what is that? What is that new external? Hesitate to use the word alien, not as extraterrestrial, but alien to that body. What is that messenger RNA doing with the DNA in your cells? What could it potentially build? And I think that's what the question is sort of getting at, is what kind of other thing could be built, other, for lack of a better word, what kind of Frankenstein sort of hybrid could be created out of this?
A man monkey,
monkey man, or any of a number of things like that.
Maxine Waters.
Well, yeah, that's a scary prospect in and of itself without the vaccine right there. But yeah, I mean, the door is sort of wide open, with what we know about genetic experiments today. It could be anything. It could be, like the things that I write about, vampires or werewolves or revenants or anything else, any other, take your pick. Look in the pages of mythology at all the chimerical creatures that exist there.
Yeah, I think we discussed that. Then I think we come to the conclusion that those things are real.
Yeah, yeah, they were. I mean, again, this speaks to our view of mythology and history, and this side of history, we want to draw a sharp line between mythology and history, but ancient peoples didn't really think in those terms. And that's why, it can be argued that mythology always has this element of historicity in it. And so, yeah, there's certainly glimmers of this record of a time when these kinds of creatures existed on the face of the planet, in our remote past, the pre-flood world, and I would argue the early post-flood and antique worlds as well.
All right, let's get to another question for you, Doctor. I've got this from Rose. She says, what do you know about the giant of Kandahar supposedly found in the Middle East and Afghanistan?
Yeah, the giant of Kandahar is apparently, I think this happened pretty shortly after we invaded, not Iraq, but Afghanistan, about 2002, 2003, somewhere in there. From what I understand, a spec ops team approached this cave, and a red-headed giant basically came out. They engaged and unloaded all, most of the ordnance that they had. I think there were a number of soldiers that were killed in the event. One of them was actually speared on a pike, from what I understand. But it wasn't until they basically decapitated the thing, I think, with their weapons, that they were able to bring it down. But over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of buzz about the giant, of Kandahar. And again, it's difficult to verify that. I trust the people that I heard those accounts from, So I'm taking them at face value, and also because we live in a strange world. We live in a supernatural world, so it wouldn't surprise me to hear that there were other encounters, with these creatures, whose populations by this time are quite sparse, and in remote areas like Kandahar, which is just in the middle of cotton picking nowhere.
Okay. So the idea of this hybrid is supposed to be that once the monkey is developed, that like the movie The Island, they're going to grow these monkeys for organs. So, Judd, if say you need a liver, and Monkey Man number 3 has got a good liver running in there, are you going to say, go ahead and give it to me?
I don't know. Why can't I just find a friend who has a donor match or something and get a piece of their liver? I'd like to have the choice.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily relish the idea of a liver donation from Caesar or Dr. Zaius or whoever.
Well, you know what's going to happen, man. As you get that liver, all of a sudden you're going to have this craving for bananas. So,
well, yeah, right. Or if I don't want the liver, I'll be called a racist or something for not wanting a piece of the liver from Dr. Zaius.
Yeah, that's just not too far from the truth. All right, so, but yeah, it's interesting. We take our Frankenstein tech overseas, and I think we were talking a while ago about the ethics of it. It seems like there must be something still in place, some boundary that's still in the United States. So we simply our Frankenstein doctors just simply go overseas and call it even. I mean, it sounds like they're playing a game here.
It is a game. It's a very dangerous game.
How far do you think that's going to go?
I think it's going to go as far as they'll take it. I think it'll go until, we're seeing it on the television and it's around us. Mm-hmm. For years I've told people that, I'm not a date setter in terms of prophecy, but for years I sort of told people it hasn't gotten, Lord of the Rings meets Terminator weird yet, but we're getting there.
Gladys Kravis says, Judd, what do you think about Tartaria? Are the red mummies Nephilim from the Nephilim bloodline?
It's hard to say. I couldn't say one way or another.
Well, now let me go another direction here, because I saw something flash up in the live chat and I want to go with this train of thought. So if you get a liver from a monkey, do you then yourself, would you think your DNA would change in that you would no longer be 100% human? And if from a salvation standpoint, when you cross over to the next life there and you're at the gate and they're checking to see if you're a human, would there be a stop or a red flag right there saying only God created humans can come into this boundary?
No, I don't think that would be the case either. I mean, if that were the case, then we're reducing the gatekeepers of heaven to a sort of cosmic TSA or something where they run you through the.
Well, I've hypothesized this earlier in other shows concerning the VACCINE. I've already got banned from YouTube, so I'm thwarting their algorithms here and there, just to make them. So was that?
I said okay.
Yeah, because I've got one strike against me, one pending. So, the VACCINE is a bunch of CRAP and HOAX, and there's 19 of them. But anyway, they're talking about that some of these vaccines are not vaccines; they're operating systems designed to change the RNA or the DNA. Wouldn't that be so? Would the gatekeepers also say that's okay too?
Listen, I think that The salvific experience is a transformative, changing thing in and of itself. I don't think there's anything that humans can do that would trump that. No matter.
Trump?
I mean, the only way that could change, I suppose, is if there were, if people had changes of heart after taking the V word. Because people can turn away.
That was a movie too.
But I don't think just on the basis of biology and physiology, I don't think that would be something that would, like you say, there would be a red flag at the gates of heaven or something. There's 20% monkey and 5% alligator and 6%, whatever.
Well, I mean, these are ethical. These are questions that we need to be throwing out here, because the technology is advancing so quickly, and people are signing up for all kinds of crap. They don't care what's going in their body. And last I read and last I checked, this body is a temple, and if you defile that temple, then some bad things are going to happen. So, can a VACCINE made by ELECTION fraud people, are they defiling the temple with this stuff?
To a degree, I think you could couch it in those terms. I mean, it's really a sort of corrupting of. It's a corruptive influence in kind of the same way that the Watcher presence or the Nephilim or the demonic presence on the world is.
Well, let me press you some more. Let me press you some more. That was the point of the defiling of humans pre-flood, when there were interactions of humans and animals doing the nasty or whatever they were doing down in there. And it was that the entire race was altered and contaminated, and so much so that only 8 remained that didn't take the pre-flood VACCINE, so to speak. So I'm saying the pre-flood people aren't going to heaven, for all I can tell, because their genes were corrupted. Their lineage was corrupted. That's the whole point. The whole point was corrupt that lineage so that Jesus couldn't be brought into the world, but they weren't able to succeed. Are they doing that again?
I think so. I mean, when you look at passages like Matthew 24, where Jesus talks about the return, time of his return being like the days of Noah, we're seeing a lot of that kind of lawlessness in the world right now, and the removal of absolute truth has contributed to that. So yeah, I mean, and it also, the Bible also talks about a great falling away. So I think in a lot of ways it's Scripture prognosticates this sort of thing happening. Now, when you getting on the sort of boots on the ground details as to how all that happens and what role the V word and other kinds of biotech are going to play in that, everything's in so much complicated motion right now. It's really hard to put a finger on it.
Well, there you go with the Matthew scripture there, that so is in the days of Noah, so shall it be when the Son of Man cometh. And in those days there was riotous living, fornicating with the animals. I'm pretty sure probably in California they all fornicate. I mean, that's why they call them Californicators, because they're getting dogs and cats and everything going on over there. And then you got this monkey human. I'm looking at this. Oh, here's a great story. We've been able to merge monkey and humans. I mean, wait a minute. I mean, is anybody else saying stop for a second here? What's going on? Yeah. Because from that, I mean, if you were able to create a whole being, it could be a giant, and that would fulfill the other part of Matthew, because there were giants in the land, and that could bring forth, when people talk about Nephilim being 30, 40 feet high, maybe it's just a bunch of gorillas, a human hybrid woke tards that are running around the planet loose. Because first they're going to find out, Well, first they're going to be kind of dumb, Judd. They're going to be in the cages waiting for somebody to say, I need a monkey heart. I need a liver. I need a left ear, or maybe a woman says I need bigger breasts. So you got a big monkey breast coming out of there, and then the monkey's going to figure out, wait a minute. They're going to become self-aware that they're in a cage and think, okay, we're getting out of here, and they're going to demand rights. But these could be the giants.
They very well could be, and I tend to think that they're, using biotech may be a means of bringing those things back, because, we really just see the tip of the iceberg. We literally, God knows what is possible. We live amongst all these techno sorcerers who are completely bereft of the kind of, Ian Malcolm style, ethics that should guide science. They are mad sentists.
Who knows what the porn industry in California is going to be doing with these monkeys? It's going to get nasty out there, Judd. There's going to be some freaky stuff going on. All right. Rose says, Doctor, why are they so obsessed with human DNA?
They being the globalist or
well, yeah, I guess the VACCINE. I'm getting better at that. Pushers.
Well,
your Bill Gates freaks.
Yeah, exactly. Well, they're when you look at the sort of crassness that people like your Bill and Melinda Gates types treat, most people, and of course they do all this under the auspices of philanthropy and, giving medical supplies and things like that to people in other countries. But they've stated on a number of occasions that they're perfectly fine with depopulating the planet, because we nasty humans are bad for the planet. We have to put mask over our face, our dirty pie holes, are just with every breath we're basically rotting the planet essentially. And so there has to be less of that. That's how they're selling it. There has to be less of that in in the world, and it's basically just repackaged eugenics, and that's why they're obsessed with the control of the human genome, the control of human genetics, the weaponization of human genetics. And of course, this is an age-old plan. This is the original plan. This is the original corruptive plan of Satan and his angels and the demons that operate underneath them.
Well, maybe it's not all that bad. Maybe AOC could order up a monkey brain because hers ain't working right now. Here's a question for you. Teflon Coat says, Judd, in the past, did man or a demigod know how to use their minds to manifest flying machines, just as the Merkaba? And is this possibly what we're seeing with the UFOs?
Possibly. We could be looking at ancient tech sort of reverse engineered or whatever. I think that we'd probably be shocked and surprised only because we catch glimpses of the kind of high technology that existed in the prehistoric world. We tend to think of that world as the backyard of Fred Flintstone. It was just a bunch of leather-clad, hominids running around trying to start fires and stay alive. The fact of the matter is, we find more and more.
Hold on. Did you say leather-clad hominids?
I did.
I just got a picture of the village people in my head, but go ahead.
Okay, well, that was not the image I was trying to project. But it does sort of, belong on a bumper sticker or something, doesn't it?
Yeah, it has to. I just thought I had another epiphany too. I should refer to Bill Gates as Bill Gates of hell. All right, let's see. Max Vogan says, are people chipped by aliens corrupted people?
Again, there's an interesting project right now in some UFO research circles One of them has been conducted under the auspices of a MUFON member named Joe Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
You may have heard of.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And he's got some pretty interesting quantifiable data about abductees and potential alien abductees, who, when these things show up, just the mention of the word of Jesus causes them to leave. It completely diffuses the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so people who get chipped, I would say it'd be interesting to look at. I couldn't say for sure, but it would be interesting to see how many of these people are actually Bible believing Christians.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that number is probably pretty low,
Mm-hmm.
but I couldn't say that for sure. But again, you have to remember that even if they do get chipped, and they come to know the Lord after that point, that transformative experience trumps whatever had been done to them.
Mm-hmm. So are you saying if somebody got the freaking Frankenstein VACCINE, that even if they were transformed, but let's just say they were unregenerated, whatever the term would be, pre-born again.
Oh, okay. I see. I misunderstood. Okay, we're talking about in terms of the V word, or introducing nanotechnology or things like that in the body. I see what you're saying. Well, I think the same kind of thing applies there.
Mm-hmm.
Any sort of any salvific experience, the transformative experience of redemption, that trumps these external factors that are being introduced in the body, because scripture is very clear that with or without that sort of external infusion, the body withers away anyway. We're dying when we enter this world.
Well, now that goes to another question that we kind of touched on earlier, and that is defiling the temple of God. Would regeneration, rebirth, defile the temple? Or what would be whatever would take away the defilation, negate the effects of defiling the temple? In other words, wipe out the defiled, what have you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I think the scenario that you're putting forward is somebody gets chipped, whatever we can attach whatever meaning we want to that,
or vaxxed.
Yeah, or whatever, and they at some point after that have a salvation experience. They come to know the Lord. Yeah, there still may be some physical consequences, to actually having had that, but in terms of your eternity, it's not, that's I tend to think that's not, that the infusion of that external, whatever it is, a chip or vaccine or whatever, that's not something that's going to negate your salvation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, we have this question here for you. Are people with Rh negative blood from the Nephilim bloodlines or Illuminati bloodlines? What makes our Rh negative blood type so special?
I'm not completely versed in the. I mean, I'm familiar with the theory about the Rh factor potentially, indicating, Nephilim ties or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it goes to the point, even if somebody does have, Nephilim DNA in them, and potentially we all do, considering, at one time that they intermarried and how profuse the populations of them were. That doesn't mean, again, it doesn't mean that people can't come to Christ and find salvation. But yeah, I mean, there may be something there. I just don't know enough about it to say one way or the other.
Okay. Smoke C says, is Billy Gates from hell a hybrid alien AI specimen, or is he the Antichrist? Evidently, he didn't have much use for old Billy.
Well, I mean, Gates is pretty much an admitted enemy of humanity, and he does it with a smile on his face.
Wait a minute. I got a song. Billy, don't be a hero. Don't make me take the vaccine. Billy, why are you so insane? I'm not going to take the vaccine. Okay, enough. Sorry. I must have some kind of RNA malfunction going on here. All right, let's move this here. Judd says, what do you think about the mummy ceremony in Egypt?
You mean the embalming process, the funerary process from like the Book of the Dead?
Well, I don't know. I guess Doreen, we're going to need a little bit more information on that. But while she looks at that up, let's go to this Gladys question. Do you think the powers that be have hidden our real history from us?
Yes, I think so. And you know, it's not conspiratorial to say this, and I'll tell you why. Because you know, I was in education, in academia and public education for 20 years. And so I saw this stuff with my own eyes, that the truth was being obfuscated from, you know, whether I was, you know, a teaching assistant or, you know, teaching high school history or, you know, at the college university level. You know, here's an example right here. If people just want, you know, you don't even have to read anything completely conspiratorial into this, but it's interesting. I've talked about it on a number of occasions. You know, professors routinely get all kinds of textbooks to review. I mean, these publishers just send them to you. Mm-hmm. And I noticed over the span of you know, about 10 years that in world history textbooks, they typically treat prehistory as a kind of speed bump to getting along to, you know, the antique civilizations like Egypt and Mesopotamia. You know, those are the really important ones that we need to be focusing on. Mm-hmm. But the criteria by which we judge those civilizations, you know, their institutions, what brought them about, writing, division of labor, centralization of government and religion, those sorts of things. If we're to use those criteria, then there were city-states and civilizations that existed millennia before the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians. And, you know, there are sites like Gobecli Tepe and Tel Carmel in Syria and prehistoric Jericho and the Nabta Playa and Çatal Hayuk in Turkey. Mm-hmm. There are a handful of these sites that were clearly city-states. They were civilizations that existed in the Neolithic period. But you hardly ever got mention of them. This was not a discussion that was being put forward in world history textbooks for the curriculum in colleges mm-hmm. and universities. Mm-hmm. And despite the fact that in many cases you had decades, stuff going back to like the 40s and 50s, that quantified that these sites existed. Now, the way that, you know, ostensibly the way we're taught that scientific history is supposed to work is that if you find new information that corroborates the prevailing, you know, idea or paradigm, then that's great. But if you find enough of it that's contradictory, then you need to amend the narrative. Well, I'm here to tell you folks with quantifiable evidence that that particular narrative has not been amended in the curriculum of colleges and universities. And I think there's a reason why, because this is a time when the Watchers and the Nephilim were very active in controlling and engineering human culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Let's get to this question from Australian Ben. He says, if the fallen are given over to the flesh, does this mean that the flesh belongs to the deceiver and the spirit belongs to God?
If the fallen are given over to the flesh, in other words, are we talking about, it sounds like a kind of backsliding scenario or turning?
I can't hardly interpret that. I mean, I just read it.
Sure.
So do what you can with it. We'll move on.
Yeah. I mean, if a person backslides to the point that they're turning on their faith, then yeah, you know, that's, I don't want to make it sound like they're throwing away the golden ticket or anything, but mm-hmm. that's kind of an apt analogy, mm-hmm. I think. But again, this brings us back to, if they return to the faith, if they have that transformative experience, and those things are going to trump, these other external factors.
And the comment on the mummies, it says the mummies were moved a couple of weeks ago. Back to the moving of the mummies. So, I mean, I don't know. It seems like they found a lot of mummies. Aren't they finding things in those tombs, Judd, that they're not telling us what they are?
Yeah, I doubt that we're getting the full, picture.
I mean, are they finding? Are they? How come they haven't said there's a golden censer or some a computer or something in those tombs? Is there never nothing in with those stuffed mummies?
Well, when those things are found, you have to, number one, I mean, even if there's nothing nefarious going on, the archaeologists have to do the diagnostic work first, before these stories, actually break.
Mm-hmm.
And so even by the time that it reaches, let's say that it's ready for public consumption, there's been a lot of filtering, that's gone on. In other words, what exactly do we want to, they're bureaucrats and, museum officials and things like that, and members of the ministries of culture, in the world,
Mm-hmm.
The PR people that have to sort of vet these sorts of things. So we don't, in some cases, we don't know what we don't know. And that sounds sort of cliche to say, but I'm sure that, in the cases where, whatever you want to call it, Watcher Tech, Nephilim Tech, whatever, knowledge is found, that's
Mm-hmm.
not going to be something that makes it into the public narrative for the most part.
Would it be good if we didn't know anything about the Nephilim or anything about these super freak woke-tard doctors coming up with these creations and all the crap going on? Would we be better off not knowing, or should we research this kind of thing to find out, because we need that for our own survival?
Well, I think we need to research it. I mean, there is the survival component, but our standing orders haven't changed. The Great Commission is still, I have a buddy who says that, the Great Commission doesn't say go forth and hunt Nephilim. It says go forth and make disciples, of all the world. And so that's our standing order. And in many ways, the more information we have on these kinds of topics, they have a very pragmatic sort of, testimonial, ministerial value to them.
But there are people hunting the Nephilim.
Yes.
All right, another question for you. It says, on L.A. Marzulli, you were talking about the Gobecli Tepe that was covered up on purpose. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, one of the great mysteries of Gobecli Tepe is that it was backfilled sometime after about 8800 BC. And archaeologists are still a little lost as to why that happened. My initial reaction to that was that perhaps it was flood deposition, but there's no uniformity of the layering. It's just all kind of basically just gravel and dirt. It's matrix. There's no stratification to it. So one of the things that occurs to me is that the people saw, almost in sort of too little, too late fashion, the negative ramifications of what was going on at Gobekli Tepe, which I've argued on a number of occasions as a kind of watcher outpost. So they wanted to weaponize that area because it was close to where Eden was. In a kind of Tower of Babel fashion, I think the Watchers thought that they could retake heaven using whatever, Eden was a special place. It was guarded by angels. So they probably thought that they could persuade or defeat the angels that guarded Eden and use this place where heaven and earth basically touched to assault heaven. But that's an entirely other discussion. But the that seems to be a viable scenario to me, is that, they backfilled this area to try and stop that influence, but it was too little too late. That influence can already be seen in contemporary levels in surrounding sites like Navoli Chori and Shanlarfa, which are near to Gobekli Tepe.
Then we have this question here from Jim Shook. Are you going to take the micro needle array patch when they try to force it on us to buy or sell? Of course, now, are you familiar with the micro needle array patch?
Yes.
By the way, it's getting dark where you are, man. You got interior light? Oh, there you go. Thank you.
There we go.
This looks good.
That'll suffice.
So this, are you going to take the array patch?
No, I'm not inclined to take the array patch.
Would you take it if they said that you can neither buy nor sell unless you have it? Now, certainly, getting the VACCINE is mandatory in most colleges now. So I'm pretty sure that businesses are going to line up, and the government will be able to say, "Hey, we didn't tell them to do it; they just did it." So.
Well, we're on the precipice right now, socially and culturally, where things could go really bad, or they could be really good and really redemptive. We could have if enough of us speak out and speak up, I think we could be on the precipice of a kind of great awakening, revival, period, a sort of cultural renaissance. Or we could go in the exact opposite direction, and become this sort of totalitarian, 1984 style state.
Now that's interesting. You bring that up because it seems that great revivals happened irrespective of who was in government or what the government was doing or anything. They happened on their own, and they changed large portion of the country. That could happen, and that could really upset the powers that be, because they would have no control over that. So, right there's some kind of hope there, Dr. Burton.
Yeah, I think so. And that's my hope, and I've said for a number of years is that I truly believe that we are on the cusp of another great awakening. And when you consider the great awakenings that have occurred in just the history of our country, they've always precipitated great change for the better. The first great awakening in this country was in the early 1700s, right up to the eve of the Revolution, and it played a very practical, functional role in the success of the American Revolution.
Well, maybe it'll play to the success of America, because it doesn't look like we're heading in a good direction right now. All right, so we have this question from Gladys. It says, Dr. Burton, do you think the Egyptian city now being touted as the greatest find since King Tut's tomb may be one of the treasure cities built by the Hebrews mentioned in the Bible?
It's possible. I think it's probably a little too early to make that call, but it's certainly possible. I mean, the site is pretty extensive in terms of the diagnostic artifacts that they're finding. So it may turn out to be. I'm following those stories. So I'm sure I'll have more commentary on that in the future.
So you just said you wouldn't take the array patch, and so I can extrapolate you wouldn't take anything with a big long needle on it.
Well, I mean, yeah, particularly if I'm being compelled by some agency. It's one thing for me to have the choice, but to say that,
Well, there seems to be developing two classes of people. One class of people is saying the other class of people are subhumans and are the problems of all mankind. Those are the unvaxxed, and they're holding back civilization's advancement. And that sounds strikingly familiar as how the Jews were described by the Nazis. That they were subhuman, that the reason they had a recession is because those damn Jews, and they had to be, first they were just villainized, and then they were tagged, and then they were attacked, and then they were herded into ghettos, and then they were put into the gas chambers. There was a ramping up. Right now, we're at that dividing point where we have the VAX-EX and the non-VAX-EX. And they're developing, of course, the media loves these two camps because they can get a lot of miles, a lot of clicks out of that conflict. And of course, one side's going to be demonized, and they're going to be a result of everyone else's problems when everything starts to fall apart. So you can see that that's kind of coming on down the line here as we progress with the success of rolling out these mandatory things. But here's something kind of funny, though. I think Rand Paul and I can't remember the guy from Texas. Can't remember his name, but both the at least two senators have taken the vaccine, but they're not wearing the mask. They're saying, "Hey, we got the vaccine, so we're not going to wear a mask now." And so it's like, what are you going to do? To me, that's kind of funny.
Yeah, well,
Ted Cruz. It's Ted Cruz.
It's this cognitive dissonance narrative that we're fed that, we can go back to having barbecues, in the summer, but you need to take your vaccine, and after you have the vaccine, it's probably a good idea to keep the mask on too. Keep wearing the mask. Well, which is it?
No, and the goalpost, that goalpost keeps getting moved.
Yeah, it's like, one of the popular memes right now is we're on year 2 of flattening the curve in 14 days.
Right. which is telling you there's not going to be an end.
One more thing.
Yeah. Which undermines the whole joke of it. So, yeah. So anyway, I didn't want to get into to make the show about that, but we're sort of talking about transhumanism, and
we are,
and there are going to be those when we went to the Gen 6 conferences in Branson, the transhumans conference there, that was saying that there's going to be sort of two types of people: the people who are enhanced by the technology. And it seems to me the VACCINE is going to be part of that advancement, but it's going to demonize, and then of course they're going to advertise the enhancements you can get. You can be smarter, you can be stronger with these various DNA changing algorithms and these operating systems they inject into you, versus the people, the Neanderthals, who refuse to advance into civilization. That's kind of the overarching thing that was going to happen that I see as progressing.
Well, I thought that was really interesting that they describe people, that Joe Biden used Neanderthal as a derogatory term, when Neanderthals are Homo sapiens. They are us. They're every bit as intelligent as we are. But yeah, I take your meaning that this is just another divide and conquer strategy. I mean, they're doing it along lines of race right now. They're blurring the definition of what it means to be human, and now they're dividing us into, desirables and undesirables.
So
almost like the Racial Institute for Racial Hygiene did under the Nazis. So
do you desire to remain human? Or would you prefer some enhancements? Would you like to have your brain enhanced?
Well, I'd like to think that I do that on a regular basis, with the tools that I have at hand. And again, that's part of the the cognitive dissonance. Yeah, would I love to have my 25-year-old brain back? Yeah, that would be great. But there are ways that you learn to work around that. You improve yourself by studying. Just as scripture say, improve yourself by studying. But
the converse argument is, for instance, you get some if you need a skin graft, sometimes I think they grow it on from pig stumping, so aren't we already getting enhancements and getting animal parts being mixed in with this already?
Yeah, I mean, they use, and for like heart valve replacements, they often use stuff from pig hearts and cow hearts, from what I understand.
And you don't have a problem with that?
We're already, implementing those kinds of things.
So where is that line? And isn't that line just being moved a little bit further? One could say.
I suppose you could use that to argue, and that probably will be used to argue the point that there are different kinds of different classes of human or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So in the line of technology, what is the next thing that we're going to see? Are we ever going to see giants?
I think so. I mean, I think it's a distinct possibility. When you consider, all the things that we've been talking about tonight, you consider all the things that we can do, in terms of biotech and genetics.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's, again, going back to Matthew chapter 24, if we're to, believe that, the time of the coming of the Son of Man is to be like the days of Noah, then a part of that was that there were giants on the earth, there were Nephilim. And so,
mm-hmm.
And not just the giant, not just the giant Nephilim, but the hybrid chimerical human animal Nephilim as well. And we're already starting to see those.
Mm-hmm. You got a good lighting on you right now. Kind of looks like a campfire. So do you know any good ghost stories, Judd?
I thought we've been telling some pretty good ghost stories tonight. I think potential ghost story. I'd like to tell. I've got a ghost story. The story of the ghost of American society would be one of them.
Oh, yeah, that is scary. Oh, how does that end?
Well, it's like a choose your own adventure book. The end has yet to be written.
Mm-hmm. Well, life is like a book, and every day we get to write a new chapter. Speaking of books, are you writing any books recently?
Yes. My colleague, Dr. Aaron Judkins, and I have been working on a book on Gobecli Tepe and the Bible, and that should be out this summer.
What does Gobekli Tepe tell us? Is it offering historical proof of giants or biblical archaeology confirmation? What is the significance?
Well, Aaron and I wanted to look at Gobekli Tepe from the biblical perspective because nobody was really doing it. But it's really interesting because it's a site it's at the headwaters of the Euphrates in southeastern Turkey. This is the land that Abraham was from. Abraham's Ur was in the north. It wasn't in the south like Leonard Woolley said that it was. Mm-hmm. This is where, it's in the vicinity of where the Garden of Eden would have been. Mm-hmm. So it's got all of these. It's in a region that overlaps with lands that are biblically relevant in later centuries. Mm-hmm. And I think what Gobekli Tepe represents is the legacy of this kind of cultural tampering, cultural engineering that I spoke about first at the hands of the Watchers and then at the hands of the Nephilim. Mm-hmm. And it gets rebooted, in the post-flood world. And so that's what I think Gobekli Tepe is that it's this legacy of Watcher manipulation, because it even the conventional archaeologists will tell you that it's, it marks this transition when people begin thinking about their gods as these anthropomorphic, not animal totemistic spirits or their ancestors, but these external, great anthropomorphic beings. And that's what these stylized T-shaped pillars you find like in Enclosure D at Gobekli Tepe. They're stylized giant anthropomorphic figures. They represent the Watcher gods of the ancient.
Are the Watchers giving humans technology on how to merge human DNA with animal DNA? Just like the old days.
Yeah, I mean, again, if you look at the Enoch material, that's certainly what's going on. That's part of the knowledge that the Watchers pass along to humanity.
Mm-hmm. So, do we consider the Watchers good guys or bad guys?
Well, initially the Watchers, it was a class of angels, like cherubim and seraphim, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were, there are Watchers that remained loyal to Yahweh, and they're mentioned, in Enoch. Raphael and Uriel were two of them.
Mm-hmm.
But you had a lot of them that were part of the satanic, coup, essentially. So most of the ones that we read about are part of the Luciferian plan, basically.
Mm-hmm. Doreen says, "Do you know anything about Planet X?"
Well, again, I'm familiar with Planet X in terms of the concept of it being a rogue planet.
Mm-hmm.
I don't subscribe to Zachariah Sitchin's ideas about Planet X being Nibiru, solely on the basis that he makes some pretty significant grammatical translation errors that somebody who had competency in reading cuneiform would not make, which makes me think that he didn't have the skills that he was propounding.
Mm-hmm.
Because anytime Nibiru shows up in Mesopotamian documents, it's called Marduk's star. And in Mesopotamian Babylonian astrology, Marduk's star is always Jupiter. It's very, very expressly Jupiter, not some rogue planet. So I'm not saying that there might not be a Planet X,
Mm-hmm.
but in terms of the whole narrative that Sitchin attaches to it with the Anunnaki and the sort of 3,600 year
Mm-hmm.
cycle, there's nothing to support that whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. Teflon Co says, Doctor, are they cloning or hybridizing extraterrestrial DNA with humans right now?
I think so. I mean, if you, again, it depends on, how you define extraterrestrial. Are they, the giants would ostensibly have mixed pedigree. They would have angelic pedigree. That by its very definition would be extraterrestrial, alien.
Mm-hmm.
So on those grounds, then I would say yes, we're already well into doing that.
Well, the reason I asked about the Watchers, whether they're good guys or bad guys, because I figure if they're bad guys, I need to know, so I go smack one in the face. They're good guys, and I'll offer them a beer. So I don't know which one do you recommend?
Probably the former, and I think that I would probably I would do what Jesus did and say, say the Lord rebuke you, Yahweh rebuke you. That's not a fight that you want to fight on your own.
Mm-hmm. So I don't want to smack a Watcher in the face by myself.
I wouldn't imagine so.
Be a pretty tough fight, huh? Well, all right, here we go. So you sort of went around the question of whether or not extraterrestrials were from out there. So do you subscribe that they're demons, or what's your take on them?
I think that most of the entities that are described in abduction scenarios are demonic. That's not to say that there's not some biological component to them, because the spirits of the Nephilim, the demons, are always looking to indwell things, and they could potentially have the technology to make sort of biomechanical suits that they could indwell, and that's why we find instances of reptilians and greys and things like that. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't believe in the possibility of other extraterrestrial biological life. I just think that
Well, this is the thing about alien abduction and the women that, incredible women that claim they've been impregnated, fetus harvesting, sexual relations with a reptoid, what have you, doing the nasty in space. How many years do they need to get it right? I mean, they seem like they seem to be this experimenting part of it. They're trying to clone. They're trying to, figure humans out and get certain properties from humans and develop because of this and that. Well, how many thousands of years do they need? They still ain't getting it right. And here we are. We got man to monkey over there in China. Seems like we're doing our own kind of thing. So what's the deal?
Well, I think that it's all part of the same, technological research agenda, if you will.
Well, they're not getting it right, or they don't have the tech, or what's the deal? Seemed like they'd grow their own monkey man hybrids.
Well, again, this goes back to the media narrative that we're fed. We don't know what we don't know. I'm not trying to evade the question.
Right,
it's just that we already know the palette of what is possible, because we're seeing the tip of the iceberg. We're at a time where magic and science are not really that different in terms of concept. The implausible and the plausible. I was talking the other day on a radio show. We're in the quantum age right now. We have super colliders where we're ostensibly studying the origins of the universe, but some people say we're opening portals and creating artificial black holes with them, and quantum computing that literally dumps questions into another dimension to derive the information and then bringing it back into our dimension. Under any other circumstances, that sounds magical, so we're at the point where the fantastic and the seemingly implausible have become plausible.
Well, it's kind of like my prophecy or my prediction about the election is that however bad one would think that, let's just say, the current administration is in power, however bad you think they could be, you have to multiply it by 10. Because what we've seen in the first month, they're just getting started. So to me, not being an official prophet, but I could see it's going to get 10 times worse. So you might as well figure, that's why I'm not really watching a whole lot of news, because I can imagine how bad it is. In fact, I really only look at the news when I do rating points on Saturday night for the most part. But you're kind of saying the same thing. And then you're also trying to speculating that the tech that we are aware of it's far more advanced than that. And so we can ask questions and should ask questions. Is everyone around us real? Are they real 100% human? Or are they somebody else? Are people sent? Are there factories in Middle Earth that are developing your neighbors to come up and say, hey, I'm your neighbor. Okay, but they're really not your neighbor. They've been sent by an algorithm that is designed for them to get you to move to the new paradigm for human civilization advancement. How about that?
Well, again, nothing would surprise me these days. There's just,
that's what I'm saying.
Just not much that surprises me.
I think I got some neighbors right now. I'm seriously doubting. Somebody says, get into witchcraft, Judd. Were all those circles the fake president used during his bogus campaign some kind of talisman? And I think we're talking about those circles. I mean, in the weirdest thing ever, a presidential candidate had like these 5 circles and people would stand in the circles. Was that some sort of black magic?
Well, I mean, it could be. Circles in world religion, and certainly in the history of magic, represent the whereas squares and rectangles often represent the earthly or the mundane. Circles have been symbolic of the ethereal or transcendent or celestial. So, yeah, there's definite that's pretty astute observation. There's definite potential there, and from what we know about the deep state and people that are involved in it, they're Luciferians. So it's not outside the realm of possibility or probability that was the case.
Well, almost every wild-eyed speculation that somebody could come up with in the last 5 years has been proven true. I mean, virtually all of it. And so, and it continues to be proved true. And so you're right. I mean, the circles, I mean, in most cases, it seems that the evil is being done right out in front. I mean, there's no attempt to hide the evil that is going on, and to move the country and enact certain laws to enforce evil on the land, And so They have no shame, and it just seemed like everything that was hidden now is in the open, and it's bizarre and getting more bizarre every day, Judd.
Yeah, it is getting stranger every day, and that's part of the lawlessness I think that's described in our prophetic scriptures.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that they'll be more brazen about it. You know, the farther we go.
Mm-hmm. Right, like saying the wall's not a wall. I mean, there's all that there's not a crisis. You know, when you have 100,000 kids with packed diapers coming across the border, and they'll tell you it's 10. They'll just say stuff that is so bizarre. It's like, are you really even saying that? And I don't know if it's because they believe it, or they're projecting, or it's just because they know what's coming and they hold the power, and they felt like they can get away with it. And in most cases they do. Here's a general question I just want to ask that come out of the live chat for you from Jared. It says, what is evil? How about that?
Evil is anything that is anathema to the will or rule of Yahweh.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so is evil an act, or is it an attitude? Is it tangible?
It's both, and it's also corporeal. You know, we know that evil is personified in the devil and Lucifer.
Mm-hmm. When it says the spirit of lawlessness, couldn't every generation make that claim?
Well, yes. I mean, but to an extent, but we're talking just looking at it on the social landscape. You have to look at it in terms of the amount of lawlessness.
Mm-hmm. So it's a matter of degree.
Just in terms of raw statistics and numbers, I don't think you can hold let's say 100 years ago in the United States, even though we were on the track at that point, I don't think you could compare the amount of, let's say, lawlessness as it's described in the scripture is taking place right now as compared to 100 years ago in this country.
Okay, so we have sort of an end time conversation going on. The spirit of lawlessness, children rebelling against their parents, such as the days of Noah. We do have a lot of intersecting phenomena going on, calling evil good and good evil. You know, when you say that, yep. when you say a boy can go and play in a girl's sports because he's a girl now, I mean, for one, whoever says that needs to have their head examined to begin with because they're psychologically deficient. But then the freak that's doing that is obviously gaming the system to get some trophies, but calling evil good. And so, I mean, we do have a confluence of a lot of factors. And are there any factors that are so obvious that are yet to be on the scene at this time?
Well, I think the most obvious one, the one that I can speak to directly, again, has to do with our educational system and the influence of postmodernism that began in the 50s and 60s, where this extreme hermeneutic was introduced into the public narrative about what is truth, and that, truth became this flexible relative thing, whereas, one time it was rightly regarded as an objective, an objective reality. And that's not the case anymore. I mean, fundamentally, factually, it is the case, but in terms of the current narrative, in terms of this war of words is taking place, the manipulation of culture, the control of our language, that's not the narrative. And so if people want quantifiable evidence of that kind of lawlessness taking place, then you need look no further than how it's impacted the educational system.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was saying what generally what remains to be sort of like the end. I guess we're talking about end time signs. We mentioned several of them. Is there any yet to be? I mean, is giants a part of that? Is there anything else that biblically said would be before the return of Christ? Is there any sort of major thing? Because I mean, I just delineated a bunch of them. I mean, is there anything else? I'm asking that would add to that fulfillment of prophecy?
Well, in a general sense, there are still a number of things to occur, but the prophetic clock has really been ticking, since Jesus arrived on the scene. But there have been some high points like Israel becoming a nation again in 1948, which interestingly enough coincided with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls that contained all this apocryphal material that's become so pertinent and relevant. I would say that the one of the qualifiers for rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem is the reinstitution of the sacrifice of the red heifer, and they now have the strain isolated to begin basically breeding that particular kind of red heifer. Well, so that's another tick on the clock, as it were, the prophetic clock. But we still have a ways to go. But the pacing is what concerns me. How we know the sequence, but
the breeding of the red heifer. You weren't talking about bestiality, were you?
Say again?
On the breeding of the red heifer, you weren't talking about bestiality.
No, I'm not. I'm talking about the actual
days of Noah. I'm just saying.
Yeah, these would be the actual sacrificial animals that the Jews would use in the new temple.
Mm-hmm. All right. Final question before we get to the end of the show. Let's take Chris's question. It says, "What do you think the mark of the beast is?"
Well, that's an excellent question. I think that it's clearly, Scripture says that it's going to have some visible token, some sort of outside, indicator that people have taken it, whether it's on the hand or on their forehead. Mm-hmm. But I think it's more than just a tattoo or something, or a mark or something like that. It's something that changes the entire person. Mm-hmm. It has ramifications beyond just the physical.
But you said said earlier though that there is a cure for that one could.
Yeah. I mean, the cure is Jesus. The cure has always been Jesus.
So if somebody has the mark of the beast, if somebody did get the mark of the beast, can they still be redeemed?
Yes, I think so.
There seemed to be some kind of finality to that. It's sort of like grieving the Holy Spirit. There seemed to be a finality that there's no coming back from that. But are you suggesting there is? Maybe I got it wrong.
Well, and no, I mean, this gets us into some deeper philosophical territory that we probably don't have time for in terms of choice and things like that. But if it were possible, yeah, the possibility would exist. But would the probability exist, I think, is what the question may be getting at. I don't think the probability would be there that people, once they took the mark of the beast, would be inclined to be open to the Holy Spirit, mm-hmm. because it would be a matter of grieving the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it does seem there's a whole swath, and probably a large swath of Americans in particular, that could care less if they take the mark of the beast.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. I mean, you can, and those are the ones making kind of these whacked out decisions that don't seem to be based on science or any kind of truth or anything. They seem to be emotion based,
exactly.
psychotic and disjointed and unrealistic. I mean, just bizarre even. I mean, they're sort of like self-identifying themselves as somebody maybe already took the mark of the beast. And you get this feeling that there ain't going to be no redemption there. It doesn't seem like this projecting that there's going to be redemption. I mean, I want everybody to have eternal life and have, and that, but it does seem like it's for some, it's just ain't going to happen.
Yeah. I agree with you.
Like it's too late.
Yeah. Like I say, we don't have time to get into all the philosophical ramifications of that, but the probability that people would be inclined to choose Jesus after taking the mark of the beast seems to be negligible. And so it would likely not even be a factor.
Right. It'd be almost bizarre as of AOC voting for Trump. I mean, you just ain't seeing it.
Yes. That kind of high strangeness.
High strangeness. Well, I do like the way we're ending this because we're kind of leading it for another show. And that is the deep philosophical question about choice against destiny. And, that does sound like a very deep program. Well, Judd Burton, I appreciate you coming on the Edge broadcast. Any final statements you'd like to say?
My pleasure. People can find me at burtonbeyond.com. I've got some new classes that I'm teaching, some interesting. I've got a preternatural morphology certification people might be interested in that studies, the vampires and werewolves and Nephilim and all that kind of stuff. And it's on sale for $175 right now. And people can email me at professorburton@yahoo.com and find out all the details.
Okay, man, sounds good. Because I'll tell you what, if your writings are as interesting as you're talking on this program, then it's going to be a great deal. Judd Burton, I appreciate you coming on the program tonight.
My pleasure, Daniel.
All right, we'll have you back on.
Okay, Godspeed.
All right, bye-bye. All right, everybody.